Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another video for Eve Echoes. Today I'm doing that follow-up to the Every Ship Coming in Tech Level 8 video that I did. I promised I would do one looking at the 5 faction battleships that are also coming. I left those out of the original video because battleships and faction battleships specifically are really not for everyone. They are incredibly expensive and there's a lot more information that I want to go into on these 5 ships, and heck, that video was already running extremely long. So basically, a lot of people ask me, hey Benzie, I know these battleships are coming, are they going to be worth it? I know they're going to be ridiculously expensive, but are they actually going to be worth that cost? If so, which one should I go for in order to best fit my playstyle? Which one do you reckon is going to be best? And make no mistake, these are expensive ships. If you thought it was painful to lose a 1.5 billion phantasm to a gate camp, wait until it's a nightmare that costs you more than 10 times that. Seriously, these are very expensive ships, and flying one is not for the faint of heart. So, that said, if you do enjoy this video or find it useful, let me know by hitting like on it, subscribe to the channel for all things Eve Echoes, ding that notification bell to never miss an upload, and of course let me know in the comment section below what videos you want me to make in future, what topics you want me to cover, that kind of thing. If you do want to go the extra mile to help support this channel, you can do so by joining us on Patreon. Details are on screen now along the bottom of the screen in that shiny new silver box. And finally then, let's talk about the faction battleships. Once people hit tech level 8, 5 faction battleships become available to them, notably the battleships for the Blood Raider Covenant, Sansha's Nation, Guristas Pirates, Serpentis Corporation, and Angel Cartel. Please don't ask about Mordu's Legion or the Servant Sisters of Eve, I don't know. I really want to get my hands on a Garma and an Astero, but that's just not happening anytime soon. The developers still haven't told us what's going on with those 2 factions. Well, I will of course let you know as soon as I do. So in this video, I'm going to go across those 5 different faction battleships. I have put timestamps in the description down below, so if there's one in particular you want to have a look at, head down into that description, click onto the timestamp that you want, and it'll take you straight there. Otherwise, we're going to start at the Angel Cartel and work our way southwest, so to speak, going down from there. So, of course, starting then with the Angel Cartel, we have the Machariel battleship. I flew one of these in the final test and absolutely loved it. Epic ship, but again, the costs of this thing are just... Anyway, attributes and fittings. Power grid, 12,353 megawatts. That's humongous. It's got a cargo hold of 1,330 cubic meters and a fitting profile of 2 drone tubes that can launch either small or medium drones, 8 high slots, 4 medium slots, 6 low slots, and then 3 of each of the power grid and mechanical rigs. That power grid, of course, is very vital because of how big this ship is. 8 turrets, and if you want to put 8 large strike cannons on here, well, you just head to the market and have a look at how much power grid a large strike cannon requires, and you'll understand why this battleship needs quite as much as it does. Now, some people have asked as well, with the power grid and mechanical rigs, how come something like a battleship only gets 3, whereas even a frigate gets 3? And it's basically because rigs are percentage based. 3 power grid rigs for something like a Dramiel, obviously if I'm putting on, say, 10% additional small cannon damage, that 10% small cannon damage means I go from 100 DPS to 110 DPS, whereas that same rig put onto a Machariel takes it from 1000 DPS to 1100 DPS. It scales with size, you don't need the additional slots. Anyway, enough ranting, let's look at the ship. Defensively speaking, the Machariel is a surprisingly solid 79,499, and unusually, that is spread equally between shield and armor. Both of them are 23,124, with 20,456 on structure. Very, very equal for the Angel Cartel ships, which means you can theoretically either shield tank them or armor tank them, depending on what you fancy. You can go either way, which is an incredibly powerful ability for them. Looking down then at the rest here, you've got an absolutely massive capacitor bank, which in fairness is... It's probably a bit larger than it in fairness needs, considering the Machariel, it's a cannon ship, and cannons don't use capacitor. So all of that capacitor is entirely for any mid or low slots that you may use. Signature radius is a whopping 247. You can lock onto 7 targets at once, and with 8 turrets, that means theoretically you can have every turret on a different target with one turret sharing. Scan resolution of 143 is actually pretty good for a battleship. Look, you're not locking onto anything particularly quickly, but you're still doing better than most other battleships would. That's a fairly solid lock-on time. Warp speed of 2.0 astronomical units per second is good for a battleship, along with an absolutely extraordinary mass, but an incredibly low inertia modifier, which makes this astonishingly nimble for a ship of its size. And looking at its trait descriptions as well, you've got an additional 50% warp speed, which means you actually warp at 3 AEU rather than just 2, and you get an additional 5 seconds of damage control activation time. So if you're fitting a damage control to this, kind of think of this like as a bigger Cinnabal or Drumiel. You're getting that additional 5 seconds worth of damage control activation, which means you go from 13 seconds up to 18. That's a big difference in terms of survivability when you have a damage control activated. Now, looking at its skills here, you've got 5% additional large cannon damage and 5% reduction to large cannon activation time for advanced large cannon operation. You can start training advanced large cannon operation as well, the large cannon skills, once you start hitting tech level 8, which is really nice as well. They've reduced that down from 9, because it kind of sucked having a battleship available at level 8, alongside obviously the battle cruisers that can use large turrets, but you couldn't train any of the large weapon skills until tech level 9, which was frankly ridiculous, but glad they fixed it. Then Advanced Battleship Command also gives you an additional 7.5% large cannon tracking speed and large cannon accuracy fall-off. This means if you're using large autocannons, you don't need to be quite as close as you might otherwise need to be in order to be as effective as possible. Good, because obviously being a battleship, you're fairly slow to move, but if you're going for a strike cannon build, which is completely viable on a Machariel, you get some insane ranges, insane damage, and you can actually fire fairly quickly as well with semi-decent tracking. Now, most people you speak to will go for an autocannon build with a Machariel because it is the kind of ship that, because of that fast warping speed and its relatively nimble nature, you can warp it right into the middle of an enemy fleet, open fire on everything, and just melt everything around you into paste while your damage control is active, then move on to the next target. Either way is a viable option. So the Machariel, it is an absolute beast of a battleship. We're not going to lie here, this thing has some insane damage to it. It's very fast moving as far as battleships go, it can relocate fairly swiftly, it's got good solid defences, and with that additional damage control activation, you can actually make it fairly survivable. That said, if it's going to be worth the additional cost to you or not, really kind of depends. I would honestly start to look at something like a Tornado first of all, start training your large cannon skills and see how you feel about large cannons first of all, then you can respec all of your cruiser relative skills into battle cruiser later on, because you'll have all of those advanced large cannon operation. You then take your battle cruiser skills, and retrain them as battleship skills if you want to change into the Machariel. The difficulty is, as it's going to be a theme in this, that if you lose that Machariel, obviously it's only the 5 faction battleships that are available. So if you're training heavily into things like battleship engineering, battleship command, battleship defense upgrade, and then you lose the Machariel, there are no other ships other than the other 4 faction battleships that can actually benefit from that. So that is something worth bearing in mind. You are skilling into something that is going to be incredibly expensive to replace until Tech 9 comes along. Next up then we have the Serpentis Corporation, with of course the Vindicator. This is an awesome looking ship, especially if like me you love those twin hull designs. Obviously it is a kind of a reskin of the Gallente Megathron battleship. It's one of the most recognisable and iconic ships in the game, and actually one of the few Gallente ships that I do really like. Anyway, looking at its stats and fittings then, again, like the Machariel, we've got 2 drone tubes, small or medium, 8 high slots, 4 mids, 6 lows, 3 power grid and 3 mechanical. It's got slightly lower power grid here in total, with only 11,250 megawatts, but that's because it doesn't really need it quite as much. Obviously the Machariel is using strike cannons as one of its options, which are one of the most power grid hungry weapons in the game. Here the Vindicator is using railguns, as you'll see in a moment. Defensively speaking, it's a little bit higher than the Machariel, which makes sense. Obviously The Serpentis Corporation tend to be a little bit tankier than some of the others. You've got 24,656 on structure, 23,865 on armor, and 18,183 on shields. This is definitely an armor tank ship, although in fairness, it's still got a sizable shield to it, and the structure is the larger aspect. But yes, if you're going to be fitting tanking modules to it, armor tanking is probably the way to go, because you're not going to be able to speed tank this, let's be completely honest. Capacitors, nice large capacitors, very useful, because obviously railguns do use capacitor when firing. Very large signature radius at 320.5. That's one thing I didn't really mention in the Machariel, how small that signature radius actually is comparatively. Yeah, it's not overly useful compared to others, but it means it takes a little bit of time to lock onto, and it is harder to hit than, say, the Vindicator here, with 320.5 meters signature radius. This is a big ship. It just it lights up your scanners like you wouldn't believe. Flight velocity as well, 128 meters per second, very, very slow. Warp speed of 2.0 AU is standard, of course. Scanner resolution 110 takes a while to lock onto anything, especially if it's a small ship like a frigate, or just to give up trying to scan drones. Seriously, no point. Very heavy mass, decent enough inertia modifier. It is a slow, heavy moving ship, of course. It's gonna take its time to relocate and point at anything, so you need to think ahead of time what it is you're gonna be doing. Looking at the trait descriptions, like the other Serpentis Corporation ships, there is no overall roll bonus here. If Advanced Large Railgun Operation does give you additional railgun damage, 50% additional large railgun damage at full training means essentially rather than 8 turrets, you're kind of acting as if you've got 12, which is frankly disgusting, along with a 7.5% increase of large railgun tracking speed, 37.5 at full training. Then Advanced Battleship Command gives an increase to Stasis Webifier Strength, Stasis Webifier Optimal Range, and Warp Disruptor Optimal Range. At full training, that's 50% additional Webifier Strength, 100% additional Webifier Optimal Range, and 50% Warp Disruptor Optimal Range. Now remember, that is Warp Disruptor. That does not affect Warp Scramblers. It means your Warp Disruptors go from, 25 kilometers up to about 32, 33, somewhere around there. It makes them nice long range weapons there. Decent for locking down at a decent amount of range. The Stasis Webifier Strength and Optimal Range, though, are the key abilities here. Rather than having a 15-kilometer Predator web, for example, that slows you down by about 50%, you've got instead a 30-kilometer long Predator web that slows you down by pretty much, I think it's like 91, 92% by the time you actually have it fitted and showcased. It is an insane amount of slowdown, which if you're using a large ship with large turrets, it means you can slow down small targets to an insane degree. And it means if someone's coming at you with cruisers, then yeah, they're still not going to get under your guns, because you can slow them down, keep them at arm's range, drift off, and just hit them with those railguns. The Vindicator is all about that Webifier control. Like the Daredevil, it's all about keeping your opponent at arm's length, or stopping them escaping, depending on what it is you need to do. If it's another battleship, it's stopping them escaping. If it's something that's come a little bit too close, it just allows you to screen off. It means if frigates are trying to get close to you, you can just activate a Stasis Webifier and stop them actually being able to approach. Very useful, because you've got 4 mid slots, and theoretically you could have 4 Predator Stasis Webs there, and that's just 4 frigates that are never getting anywhere near you, whilst the rest of your fleet picks them off. Now the Vindicator itself, again, very powerful ship, very nasty railgun damage there, decent tracking speed, means that you can use this as a close-range brawler thanks to the Stasis Webifier abilities. Ultimately, you aim to get to about 30 kilometers and just hit people with large snub-nosed railguns. That said, you can still get away with the rifled railguns. They do insane damage at some very extreme ranges, decent enough tracking speed compared to other large railguns on battleships because of those roll bonuses. Honestly, I think the Vindicator is one of the better faction battleships out there, simply because it is just that little bit more survivable than some of the others, in that it isn't immediately destroyed as soon as someone shows up with a frigate. On to the Guristas Pirates next, which is one of the more popular of the pirate factions, with the Rattlesnake, an insanely cool looking ship that looks a lot more like a Scorpion than it does a rattlesnake, but hey, the name Scorpion was already taken by the Caldari Navy version of this ship, although it kind of is in the backstory of who really built it. Was the Scorpion the first one and it was stolen by the Guristas and made into the Rattlesnake? Or was the Rattlesnake the original design blueprint that the Caldari Navy bought from the Guristas pirates and turned into the Scorpion? Who knows? Anyway, let's have a look at the settings here. This one is a little bit backwards compared to the other. It's the first one to diverge away from the mold of the others. Different fitting profile here is what I'm trying to say. You've got 2 drone tubes, 5 high slots, 3 mid slots, 7 low slots, and 3 of each the power grid. So you've got less, you've got fewer on the mid slots and fewer turrets as well, but you are getting much more in the low slots, which is where this ship really differentiates. A lot lower on its power grid as well, only 8,058 megawatts. Still very tanky though, 78,993. Most of that you can see is in the shield at 27,044, not much in the way of armor comparatively, 19,385, and the structure is sitting at 20,275. It's it's a fairly tanky ship, and it kind of needs to be, because it's large, it's fairly slow moving, and well, yeah, you can see there, signature radius 352.8, flight velocity 103. Oh boy, it is a slow ship that is big and very easy to hit, and with that inertia modifier and high mass as well, it's not going anywhere particularly quickly. Looking at its trait descriptions though, my goodness, 425% increase to large drone damage. Yeah, okay, you've only got 2 drone tubes, but you know what? Those drones pack one heck of a punch, and 200% additional large drone hit points as well means they're not going anywhere anytime soon. You're then looking at advanced large drone operation, giving you a bonus of 10% large drone damage, so obviously an extra 50% on top of that 425%. You're nearly 500% more effective drones. So those 2 are kind of acting almost as if they're 10, which is, that's disgusting when you think of it that way. Plus 10 kilometers extra drone range per level, meaning at 5 then it's 50 kilometers extra drone range. That means if you were to go a little bit crazy and fit all 3 of those power grid rigs with Tech level 3 drone range optimizers, you've got what? 5 kilometer drone range from having drone at 5. You then have the 3 rigs which do 15 kilometers each. So that's 5, 20, 35, 45, 50 kilometers. Plus then the ship itself giving an extra 50 kilometers. That's 100 kilometer drone range with some rather insane drone DPS on there as well. Of course, you can go for the brawling approach, the much shorter range, and just have your drones hit things for insane damage, bringing in your high slots as well, which of course are going to be missiles, and that you'll see in a moment. But theoretically, those missiles still get like a 60 kilometer range as well, so you probably want to try and rig for a similar kind of range, and just up your DPS and sit at sort of 60 Ks and rip everything to shreds. Missile torpedo kinetic damage plus 10%, thermal damage plus 10%, so that's 50% onto each of those at full training, and 20% shield resistance at full training as well, means that that already substantial shield on the Rattlesnake, sorry, closed everything down there, that already substantial shield of 27,044 suddenly has really powerful resistances on it as well, making this incredibly tanky with an awful lot of drone DPS that it can quite comfortably kick out alongside large missile launches, which go to a good 60 odd kilometers each. So from 60 kilometers away, you're doing massive damage and able to take an absolute beating in return. As far as the faction battleships go, yeah, the Rattlesnake is going to be one of the most popular. If you are going to build one of these, the Rattlesnake, I believe, is going to be your most lucrative seller. Like the Healer, it is a very popular ship. A lot of people are asking me about this one. Is this going to be worth it? Yes and no. Yes, it's going to be worth it if you know how to fly it. No, it's not going to be worth it if you're going to be one of those idiots that buys it, undocks it, and flies it straight into a gate camp. So bear that in mind. Incredibly expensive ship, but very, very powerful in the right hands. Let's move on then to Sansha's Nation and the Nightmare. Very unusual looking vertical design ship, this one. I'm never quite sure if I like it. There's a bit of me that likes it every time and thinks that's really cool. It looks a little bit like there's a phantasm stuck to the top there. It's like a phantasm stuck to the top of a myrmidon, I think is the best way to describe it, and I'm not sure if I like that or not. Anyway, looking at its stats here, very large power grid, as you would expect for something that is using laser turrets, along with 2 drone slots, 6 high slots, 3 mid slots, 7 low slots, and 3 of each the power grid rig. So we're back to the typical sort of, the typical layout here for a faction battleship. Very powerful, nice decent cargo hold capacity, and solid defenses there, 81,386, most of which is in the shield, 26,665. Armor is not too bad at 20,192, structure at 19,863. Very tanky ship, and that's before we get into the stats and the other crazy stuff it can do there. We then have the decent capacitor bank, very high, 16,589. Again, you're going to be firing lasers, you're going to be using shields. That means it's going to be fairly capacitor hungry, which is why we've got such a large capacitor on it. Signature radius also isn't too bad at 294, although we're going to max that out very quickly, as you'll see in a moment. Very slow flight velocity at 121 to start with. I say very slow, it's about middling for a battleship. It's not terrible, but it's not overly fast either, but it's a battleship, what do you expect? Again, low scan resolution, high mass, low inertia. Moving into its role bonuses here though, we get that maximum shield field module that we are used to for these Sansha ships. This means if you fit a shield field module to it and activate, you get up to 50% increases to your resistances. So that already absolutely massive shield at 26,000 is going to have extra powerful resistances to it, which means it's a huge shield that takes less damage than others do. It's an incredibly tanky ship, probably the tankiest of all 5 of the incoming faction battleships. If you want something that can stick around in the middle of a battlefield, the Phantasm is going to be the ship for you. Especially then as it gets large laser damage increase and a 7.5% laser tracking speed, 37.5 at full training with 50% additional laser damage. That means those 6 turrets are working as if they're 9. 9 large pulse lasers, for example, does an insane amount of damage, and you've got the tank to survive sitting in the middle of a fleet. Advanced Battleship Command then increases both your shield by an additional 5%, so that already very large shield with very high resistances is going to be 25% larger than it already is, and you're getting an additional 30% afterburner velocity per level as well, meaning that's 30% per level. At full level 5, that's 150% additional afterburner velocity, meaning the suddenly very slow battleship becomes about as fast as most cruisers, if not faster, with that afterburner active. It's insane. It's the bonuses basically of having a micro warp drive equipped, but without the signature radius penalty and without it chewing into your capacitor, which is just insane. If you liked the Phantasm, you liked that idea of just turning up and ruining everyone's day by blasting them in the face with laser beams, then the Phantasm is definitely going to work for you. Again, I think this is one of the better ones out there. The Phantasm is definitely one of the top of those battleships I think that you're really going to enjoy. Is it going to be expensive? Yes. Is Sansha's Nation already incredibly difficult to farm because of all the crazy stuff going on in the Sansha's Nation systems? Yes. Is it going to be even more lucrative to do so come Tech level 8? Yes. Last but by no means least, we come to the Blood Raider Covenant and the Bhaalgorn. Cool looking ship. Reminds me a lot of the aliens from Pitch Black if you've watched that. It's got a very similar sort of prow to how their heads look, along with that very narrow, thin profile to it. Interesting looking ship. Statistically speaking though, very large power grid, 13,770. Again, it's a laser ship, it kind of needs that. 2 drone tubes, 7 high slots, 5 mid slots, 5 low slots, 3 mechanical rigs and 3 power grid rigs. 5 mid slots. Oh, okay, that's terrifying. That's already terrifying. We'll come back to that in a moment. Defensively speaking as well, pretty sound, 84,339, vast majority in armor, 25,660, definitely an armor tank. The shields there, 17,804, aren't going to hold up particularly well against other battleship-sized laser weapons, and those will go down fairly quickly, but that armor tank is substantial, nearly 26,000 on the armor tank. Plus then a solid structure of 23,239 means if the armor tank does fail, there is still a considerable amount of tank and hit points to get through that allow you to bring your tank back online and start to recover. I'm not going to suggest you hull tank this thing by any suggestion, that would be stupid, but there is a lot of hull to get through once you've chewed the armor. It's a good safety net for the armor tanking side of things. Looking at its capacitor banks here as well, the Bhaalgorn 17,014, and that is a very big capacitor. It needs to be, considering it's going to have a lot of active stuff going on, like neutralizers and the lasers, but of course we're also getting big bonuses to the Nosferatu, so we will still get a lot of use out of that as well. So a large capacitor, but with bonuses to Nosferatu, it almost doesn't need that capacitor. I'm not going to say take it away, far from it, but this is one of the few ships that can really control its capacitor very, very nicely. very large signature radius, 317.5 meters, and very slow at 110 meters per second. Unlike the Nightmare, the Bhaalgorn has no real way to bring that speed up either. You're not getting any bonuses to propulsion systems here, so you are a very slow battleship. In fact, I think it actually works out as the slowest of the 5 faction battleships. Anyway, looking then at its traits, it's got the typical Blood Raider Covenant roll bonus here, the 100% reduction to any Energy Nosferatu overload penalty. What that actually means is confusingly worded. We've done the research into this. What this means is that if your capacitor has a higher percentage than their capacitor, you can still use an Energy Nosferatu. Normally, if your capacitor is higher percent than theirs, say you're at 55%, they're at 45%, then the Energy Nosferatu does not transfer any energy. Their percent needs to be higher than yours usually, except on Blood Raider ships. Looking then at Advanced Electronic Warfare bonus, plus 15% Energy Nosferatu efficiency, plus 15% Energy Neutralizer strength, and plus 20% Stasis Web of Fire optimal range. Now you'll remember when I talked about the Crew War, I said that one of the problems with it was that it has 3 mid slots, but it's got bonuses to all 3 as well, meaning if you were to fit all 3 mid slots, you have nothing there to tie your opponent down in regards to things like Warp Disruptors or Warp Scramblers. Here on the Bhaalgorn, you have got 5 mid slots, so you can have all of those and 2 spare. You can fit a Web, a Neutralizer, a Nosferatu, and still have 2 spare mid slots, either for Warp Disruption or for like doubling up on Neutralizers or Nosferatus or something like that. And what this means is that this thing can drain an incredible amount of capacitor, both in terms of the Nosferatu and the Neutralizer. If you have Neutralizers and Nosferatus fitted to this ship, you will flatten an enemy player's capacitor in seconds. Like, it is genuinely insane. And since the October-November update gave us that additional electronic warfare, gave us the skill now gives additional range to both the Neutralizer and the Nosferatu, this ship just got better because it can now do those more effectively at longer range using those large Neutralizers and large Nosferatus. I kid you not, you can just shut down an enemy ship's capacitor in seconds with this thing, and the Web of Fire stops them running away as well. If you have a Warp Scrambler on there, you can also switch off their micro warp drive. It's like, yeah, what are you going to do now? Your micro warp drive doesn't work. If you've got an afterburner, the webs are going to keep you in position, and I've completely flattened out your capacitor, so you've got no tank and you can't activate your weapons. This is why the Bhaalgorn is probably, in my opinion, one of the most powerful of the battle cruisers, the battleships, assuming it can get to the target. That slowness to it is a big disadvantage. It means it can be outrun fairly quickly, and if you are at a positional disadvantage, it's a bad option to engage. You really need to pick your fights very carefully in PvP with a Bhaalgorn. You do also then, from Battleship Command, Advanced Battleship Command, sorry, get an additional 15% large laser damage. That's of course 75% at full training, and 7.5% large laser tracking speed. This makes for some very powerful lasers on an already disgustingly powerful ship. If you're to ask me which one of the 5 faction battleships I think is going to be most popular, I would say the Rattlesnake, probably followed by the Machariel. Which one I think is most powerful is going to be a toss-up between the Bhaalgorn and probably the Rattlesnake, although in fairness the Nightmare's not far off. All 5 of these are disgustingly powerful ships. I just genuinely think that the Bhaalgorn, in any one-on-one fight, as long as neither one has a positional advantage and neither can warp away or anything like that, the Bhaalgorn's going to win because it just shuts down everything, and it is a terrifying vessel because of that. Like, genuinely, if I see one of these drop onto grid, I'm going to flee that grid. I'm just going to run, because that is not a ship that I want to be fighting. I'm going to have no capacitor. You need to swarm this thing, and you need to swarm it hard, or it's just not going to die. And yeah, I'm being serious. The Bhaalgorn, I genuinely think, is going to be the biggest and most powerful of these battleships. I do also think it's going to be one of the least popular because people don't like thinking about electronic warfare. They just want the big guns and to smash things together, which is why I think the Rattlesnake is going to win, because it's missiles and drones, and people love those systems. Anyway though, those are just my thoughts and opinions in regards to the 5 new battleships that are arriving. I think that it's going to be this way. What do you guys think? Which one are you looking forward to the most? Which ones did you fly back in the final test if you were part of that? As I said, I only got to fly the Machariel. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I just don't think it holds up compared to the others. Which one are you looking forward to? Which one do you enjoy the most? Which one are you scared of the most? Let me know in the comment section down below. Otherwise, happy sailing and see you in New Eden.